non-international prep is second neg.
Okay. Okay.
We affirm resolve the United States should accede to the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea without reservations. Our first and only contention is lost at sea. Raymond of the Brookings Institute in 2017 writes that for decades, UNCLOS served as the foundation for maritime economic activity and freedom of navigation as we know it. As a result, Krasner of George Washington Law Review in 2007 corroborates that UNCLOS has transformed the seas from a cause of violence to a legal-based order. Unfortunately, Raymond continues that this maritime safeguard is under threat, with a marked trend for rising powers to reinterpret and subvert the agreement. Indeed, Azuma of the American Security Project in 2015 postulates that China exploits UNCLOS as a weapon to expand control over the South China Sea. Already, Kwok of the Law Fair magazine in 2018 writes that a rules-based order has begun unraveling in the South China Sea. Fortunately, acceding to the agreement preserves the international maritime order in three ways. First, giving America a seat at the table. Bateman of the Korean Journal of Defense Analysis in 2007 describes that without acceding, the U.S. is unable to challenge the contentious interpretations of other countries, instead relegated to the position of an outsider. However, Gates of the University of Chicago in 2017 explains that by ratifying UNCLOS, the United States would enable American legal scholars to participate in the international forums that mold international maritime law. For example, Sandalo of the Brookings Institute in 2004 writes that acceding would allow America to veto amendments proposed to UNCLOS. Second, by resolving American hypocrisy. J. Tolby of the Naval Law Review 2012 outlines that the absence of American UNCLOS creates a narrative that it is an imperialistic power seeking the benefits of UNCLOS without acceding to the agreement, a vulnerability that China has exploited to win over many coastal states. For example, Patrick of the Atlantic in 2018 clarifies that countries like India, Peru, Brazil, and Malaysia have turned to China's interpretation. Overall, Houck of Pennsylvania State University in 2012 indicates that America's hypocrisy burdens its efforts with the stigma of unilateralism, but acceding would provide a strong basis for America to influence development of maritime law. Third, by enforcing rulings. Kwok writes that in the face of coordinated multilateral pressure, China abides by international law to avoid losing global legitimacy. Indeed, she outlines that in the first year after the UNCLOS ruling, China kept in line with the agreement despite its outward rejection of the decision, but since then our allies have caved due to a lack of American backing, prompting an expansion of China in the region. For example, Kwok writes that after China threatened Vietnam for drilling in its own waters, Vietnam, fearing American abandonment, immediately stepped down. Fortunately, Houck explains that by acceding, America would take the natural leadership role to facilitate multilateral coalitions to support the UNCLOS legal framework. Ultimately, this is the story of UNCLOS, an international safeguard of maritime peace derailed by ambitious Chinese lawfare tactics pushed to the verge of collapse, and without immediate action, the effects will be disastrous. O'Rourke of the Congressional Research Service in 2014 writes that if China's interpretation of UNCLOS gains acceptance, it would set a precedent to challenge the agreement globally. Cardin of the University of Pennsylvania in 2018 indicates that even a regional acceptance of China's views would prompt a fragmentation of international law. Thus, Smith of the University of Rhode Island in 2017 concludes that without American accession to counteract China, UNCLOS is dangerously close to collapse. And this collapse would be disastrous, as Nemeth of Oklahoma State University in 2007 describes that UNCLOS conflict resolution procedures provide a mechanism to successfully bring countries to the table, concluding that dispute settlement is twice as likely under UNCLOS. For example, Watson 15 of the Asia Maritime Transparency Initiative writes that UNCLOS dispute settlement has resolved the Bangladesh and Myanmar dispute, concluding that the settlement has completely ended conflict in the region. This is especially important as Kelly of Global Offshore Drilling quantifies that there are 40 active maritime territorial disputes globally, and without an adequate dispute settlement, Hensel of Florida State University writes that territorial disputes are the biggest source of war over the last 3 centuries. Overall, Gates concludes that without UNCLOS, countries would turn towards their military to solve disputes. Thus, we affirm.
Can I see your latest pronounced Cook evidence? Kuan? Yeah. I just get you to confirm? Is it this article?
I'm not sure. No. It's this one.
Oh, that's nice.
Time series.
Oh, yeah, it's the same thing. That was 2 seconds.
Yes, the header's just different. Those 2 seconds. Actually, this might be a bit too high. Is everyone ready?
Yes.
Time starts now. Valley International prep negates. Our sole contention is stopping progress. In the status quo, U.S.-China relations on the South China Sea have began to subside, as Manning 17 explains that the United States has always sought freedom of navigation over trade routes. China knows that as long as shipping lanes are not threatened, the United States will not risk war with nuclear weapons state over rocks and reefs to which they have no claims, just to defend the UN Convention on the Law of Sea, which they haven't even ratified. Because of this, Them 18 of the Diplomat explains that the U.S. recognizes the threat of Chinese expansionism, but hesitates to take more robust actions in balancing China due to their concern of precipitating conflict on the South China Sea. Additionally, China has shown an effort to deal with their disputes in the region diplomatically, as Kentaro 18 writes that Southeast Asian nations in China have created a code of conduct for the South China Sea, forming the basis for future negotiations to rule out further conflict in the area. He concluded that Asian-China relations have entered a new stage with the ability to maintain peace and stability on the South China Sea. Affirming disrupts progress being made on the South China Sea for 2 key reasons. And the first is by angering Chinese hardliners. Haynes 17 of the Diplomat explained that China's aggressive pursuit of territory claims, coupled with their militarized island-building campaigns, demonstrates their goal of replacing the U.S. as a regional hegemon. Affirming disrupts their goal, as Student 16 explained that U.S. ratification of UNCLOS would allow U.S. nationals to serve on arbitration panels. Consequently, the presence of American members on the panel would play into suspicions of Chinese hardliners who view international legal regimes as a vehicle for advancing U.S. interest. Zhang 16 writes that confirming hardliner beliefs will undermine Chinese moderate positions within China's debate system. This would be catastrophic, as hardliners are the only political party to unanimously support hegemony on the South China Sea. Legitimizing hardliners' beliefs would be bad, as Jacobson 12 quantifies that when comparing nationalist states to non-nationalist states, nationalist states are 250% more likely to initiate war. The second is by bringing China to court. Affirming allows the U.S. to disrupt China's goal of becoming a regional hegemon, as Mirasola 15 of the Harvard Law Review writes that ratifying UNCLOS will allow the U.S. to participate in and help shape dispute resolution mechanisms like the International Tribunal for the Law of Sea. Problematically, Fisher 16 states that the history of Western imperialism haunts China, causing distrust and skepticism of international institutions such as the tribunal, which Chinese state media portrays as a plot to weaken China. However, if China loses these tribunals, they're pushed into a corner and forced to retaliate, leading Mitchell 7 to conclude that unclosed dispute mechanisms doubles the probability of militarization. The impact is regional conflict. Farley explains in 2018 that Xi Jinping has boxed himself into a corner on securing the South China Sea, citing various internal political commitments. Blumenthal furthers in 2012 that China has a great strategic, economic, and political interest in controlling the region. Xi is currently going towards achieving his goal of hegemony through diplomatic negotiations, but affirming will change that, as Farley concludes that Xi would declare war if China's stability in these areas are threatened. Historically, when challenged, China has used military conflict to make examples of coastal states like Vietnam and the Philippines. As Stout of Time magazine reports that in just 6 weeks in the 70s, China sent 80,000 troops to Vietnam to teach them a lesson, leading to 50,000 deaths. Causing China to revert back to its old habits of bullying their allies for control would be devastating. As Tweed 17 explains, that U.S. mutual defense treaties with regional partners means any regional flare-up on the South China Sea will involve America. This is catastrophic. As Rando 17 quantifies, that as China asserts the right to defend territory, any U.S.-China war would kill a minimum of 12 million people. Thus, negate.
Ready for cross?
You have the first question as the first speaking team.
If anything, wouldn't the U.S.'s military provoke hardliners in China?
I'd argue, yeah, that's why we should actually know. I'd say hardliners get mad when the United States challenge the hegemony of the South China Sea.
Right,
The United
and
States
what's better,
military is
using hard
only in
power
the
or soft
region.
power?
What'd you say?
What's better, using hard power or soft power?
Well, when looking at hardliners, they get mad at hard power to the extent that the United States tries to take the South China Sea away from them. When looking at what's happening right now, all the United States is doing is practicing freedom of navigation operations, which just secures their trade routes, not takes things from China like the South China Sea. May I take a question? Okay, if tensions are high in the status quo, wouldn't it be logical to say that trade is going down right now?
What do you mean?
If tensions are high right now,
Our impact's not trade.
it's just a question. If tensions are high right now,
Why
would
is that
trade be going
relevant?
down?
Why is that relevant?
We'll show you what our rebuttal. It's just a question. If tensions are high right now, would trade be going down?
That's not the kind of question.
It's a yes or no. If tensions are high right now, would trade be going down?
Why does it matter? I don't know. No.
We'll show you in the speech.
Okay.
Can you just answer the question?
No,
It won't be going down.
no,
Why?
because they both have interests to preserve trade.
Okay, but we tell you tensions will scare investors from going into the region. Wouldn't
What
that mean
investors
trade
are
is
in the
going
region?
down? What?
What investors are in the region?
Investors that are looking to places like the South China Sea to start businesses and grow economies. But if
So
tensions are
aren't they
high,
already doing
wouldn't they
it?
not want to go to the South China Sea?
Dude, why does that matter? Can I
I'm
have a
telling you,
question?
we'll show
Can
it to you in our
I ask a
rebuttal.
question now? Because you repeated the same question.
Okay, if you're gonna dodge the question, yes, you can ask it.
Okay, so at the same point, why would China want to provoke a war if it's going to kill 12 million
Well,
people?
we're not saying China wants to provoke war right now, but that changes in your world. You see, once we affirm, we get presence on arbitration panels, which means that hardliners get their
Okay.
beliefs confirmed, and they can then go
Wait,
towards
wait,
getting
wait. On your
hegemony over the
second-
South China Sea militarily.
On your thing about courts, right? You're telling me that like China's already wary of these tribunals, but U.S. is in unclosed. So why aren't they listening to the tribunals right now?
Well, they're not listening to the tribunals right now because they ruled against them. But once the United States goes in
That
and
was
brings
one
another
ruling, right?
tribunal,
Like, why did
Pardon?
China publicly reject all tribunals if only one ruling was against them?
I just
like-
told you, they rejected it because they didn't support them in the tribunal. But what we tell you is once the United States affirms and they start tribunals, they have no way
How
to
does
just
the US
reject
start
it as the United
tribunals?
States is a superpower.
How
At
do-
that point, Mitchell tells you the probability of militarization doubles.
How does the U.S. start tribunals? Like,
Well, once they join UNCLOS, they can say, your territorial claims are unfair, let's challenge them in court.
okay, so basically isn't China militarizing UNCLOS and using it to its advantage, and America provides backing to our allies
Okay.
in the region to stand up
But
and
at
just
the point,
do
yeah.
use the legal interpretation.
But at the point at which they're still using diplomacy to settle things in the South China Sea, we say that's better than war.
Okay, wouldn't China just be
That's
exploiting
time.
our?
Starting with a framing overview and then going line by line. Is everyone ready?
Where should we flow frame?
On your case.
Okay.
Time starts now. There's 3 reasons a war between America and China will never happen. The first is that both countries have such large nuclear arsenals, which means that mutually assured destruction checks both countries from trying to enter conflict. But the second is that both of them are the 2 engines of the world economy, which means that neither of them have an incentive to even try to expand because they know the risk is too large. Because if an economy goes down, that also shafts any of their ability to do things like military spending to begin with. But third and more importantly, their own analysis says that America doesn't have a vested interest in the region and will past never go to war over a couple of rocks and chips. The reason this frames around for you is this means that what's important is not war, but Chinese expansion, because China is expanding through things like lawfare tactics, which undermines the sovereignty of other countries. That's the only impact in the round you can evaluate. Don't evaluate links to war. At that point, they don't have a link into the only impact that matters. Go to their arguments. At the top, they say things in the South China Sea are really good right now. The problem is, the reason they say that's true is because America is not exerting our influence, but that means uniqueness controls the direction of the link, because what Azuma says right now is that China's weaponizing UNCLOS to expand in the region, which means that they have no risk of stopping China from expanding and taking the sovereignty of other countries, which means we're the only chance to reverse that link. We're the only way that you solve that. But secondly, more importantly, they talk about a code of conduct that's problematic for them, because Lathu 18 says that China's using the code of conduct to exploit other countries in the region by allowing them to expand their sovereignty at the expense of other countries by including vague language in the agreement that lets them do whatever they want in the region, which means that just because tensions are low right now is a facade. It's not the fact that China's not expanding on the individual links. First, on hardliners, there's two problems with the argument. And first, you're returning because Noizo 7 says that when you affirm, you decrease the use of military power in the region, because now we have an avenue to do things through UNCLOS, so we don't need to use things like phone-offs. That's really important because they are talking about phone-offs as well. But what Cronin 18 says is that phone-offs allow China to justify their hardliner position because it rallies up the nationalism in the region, which means that if the phone-offs are going down, but this logically makes more sense for the warrant, then we would say that hardliners are always more provoked by military escalation in the region, which means that if you decrease military use, that means that holistically there's going to be a decrease in provocation of hardliners. But secondly, more importantly, uniqueness again controls the internal link. Insofar where Azuma says right now that China's expanding the South China Sea through things like exploitative contracts, that means that they have absolutely no solvency. Hardliners have already taken over the region and are already expanding China's policies. Even if they're not the majority, that doesn't matter because the moderates have to, in order to win votes and pass policies, appease the hardliners, and as a result, their foreign policy is always going to be hardline. On their second warrant about courts. Three problems with the argument. The first is that they assume that America is going to sue just because we join arbitration panels. That's not true. America would need to bring a claim to the court, but America is not on the tribunal at all, which means we're not going to sue China. The reason this doesn't take our case is about encouraging our allies to enforce a ruling that already happened between the Philippines and the United States, which means it's not about any new ruling, it's about a past ruling, which means any of their impacts have already been triggered. But secondly, more importantly, they say China's going to expand in the face of arbitration. That's not true empirically. It's unverifiable. Quack 18 says is in the first year of the UNCLOS ruling, China did listen. It's when you raise the opportunity cost for them to not listen by having coordinated pressure against them that they actually back down and follow international law, which means that China's going to listen holistically. That's the only empirical analysis of what happens empirically. But third and more importantly, they say themselves that China already views courts as biased. That triggers their link on their first warrant. Make them pick one. Go to the impact. Their impact is conflict. The problem is that we would say that in the past, America has increased presence in the region before, but China never escalated to conflict. Even though they were boxed in at the time, they need to show why UNCLOS, a single law of the sea that's not even a direct confrontation in China, is going to provoke them into conflict in a way that hasn't been done before. But secondly, more importantly, realize that you're going to decrease miscalculation in the region because Noizo 7 says there's a decreased reliance on military power. That's really important because Glacier 12 says that our military operations in the region are the number one source of miscalculation, which means you decrease miscalculation by stopping provoking China. Literally 4 days ago, a Chinese ship almost collided with America. It's a number one source of conflict. The Wang is very simple. China is expanding right now. The only impact on the ground is going to be sovereignty. This war is never going to happen, which means that holistically, we're the only team with an internal link to the only impact, and we're the only team with a risk of changing things in the South China Sea.
Nice. It's going to be straight down there. Well, first it's going to be, just straight down their case. Time for its framing front line.
Wait, can you say that again? Straight down their case, then what?
Straight down their case, if time permits, and then go to framing, then the front line. Everyone good? Opponents? Jackson? Judges? And start up at the top of the case, 3 top shelf responses. First, UNCLOS has 167 members, 166 of them which can challenge China, question their legitimacy, all of them which could have sided against China when UNCLOS ruled against them. They need to show you why the United States is all of a sudden going to switch the entire narrative of the rest of the world. But second, the United States is inherently going to break UNCLOS if we join it. Patterson explains that the U.S. has a historical trend of valuing domestic interest over international law. At that point, they conclude that joining international legitimacy does nothing because the U.S. is just going to break it and that's going to further the collapse. But third, this literally inherently does not make sense. The reason UNCLOS was made is because there was not international maritime law. What we'd say is that if UNCLOS inherently breaks down, countries are just going to turn to some other form of maritime law. They don't show you why all of a sudden every territorial dispute in the world is all of a sudden going to turn to conflict. That doesn't make sense. But either way, let's go down their links. On their first link on the seat of the table. First, Sun 16 explains that this is inherently harmful because it angers Chinese hardliners and confirms their suspicions. The difference here is between angering hardliners, which they link into, and confirming their suspicions, because Zhang explains when you confirm their suspicions, they beat up political moderates and then gain control of the political system. But second, even if we actually challenging China with the sea is problematic because Fisher explains that a history of U.S. Western imperialism then boxes China back into a corner when they're challenged, and thus Mitchell concludes that the probability of militarization doubles when we have the sea. But then third, when China is mad, they're simply going to deny any amendments that we put forth. At that point, our seat at the table means absolutely nothing if China's going to deny our amendments. But then go to the second link on hypocrisy. Off the top, understand that hypocrisy means absolutely nothing. China can literally turn to anything else in history to point the U.S. as a bad actor in the region. They did this when we deployed anti-missile systems in South Korea. They're literally doing this with the trade war right now. Even if they suffer hypocrisy, they don't suffer other issues China can port to. But then second, I'd argue that countries are following China because of economic dependence. Literally, countries are not going to risk their entire economy to change some interpretation, if I'm using Ryan's words correctly, of some piece of paper. At that point, countries are going to care about their economy more than the United States, who's halfway across the world. Go to the third link on enforcing rulings. One, they literally concede that China followed UNCLOS for a year, literally called for their card on Kuwait. It explains nothing about the fact that there was not a coordinated response. Instead, when he explains that China stopped following it because they perceive the U.S. as stirring up trouble, at that point, it's all about China pointing back the narrative to what the United States does. But because they're always going to point it to something like trade war, anti-missile systems, they're never going to follow the rulings. But then also, he literally concludes that the peace and the stability in the region is caused when countries who are losers understand that they are losers and then are pushed into submission by China. At that point, if you embolden allies of them push against China through the coordinated response, that disrupts the stability their own card talks about. Second, China is never actually going to listen to coordinated pressure. First, because we already see coordinated pressure happening right now with ASEAN, but China isn't following it. But then second, hardliners are not going to care about coordinated pressure if it's all led by the United States, who inherently angers them. But then the third response at the bottom, they talk about this signal of goodwill. That's absolutely meaningless for three reasons. First, it doesn't stop China from economically coercing other countries. Second, it doesn't stop China from breaking international law. But then third, if anything, this is just going to anger China because once again, it gives the perception that the United States is trying to become the regional hegemon of the South China Sea through exerting our power to other countries. They never explain to you why this goodwill all of a sudden leads to a change in policy. But then, then go down to their impact. This is even worse. First, their evidence is literally from a year and a half ago. Make them explain to you when UNCLOS is actually going to collapse. If literally UNCLOS has been collapsing for a year, when are territorial disputes going to blow up into war? But second, remember that UNCLOS deteriorating is not inherently going to mean that countries are going to turn to conflict. Pre-UNCLOS was not just a world of conflict around every single territorial dispute, which means A, this is all going to be controlled by intent, which we'll talk about in our case. But then B, it shows that countries are inevitably going to turn to some form of maritime law. But then they actually make a giant mistake here. They read to you that the number one cause of conflict over the past 30 years have been territorial disputes. UNCLOS has existed for almost 30 years, so that means either A, UNCLOS is not effective in decreasing war, or B, if anything, it makes it worse, which is the Mitchell evidence I explained to you, which means that UNCLOS doubles the probability of militarization. At that point, go to our case. On framing the mishandle this, literally our impact is double. They completely miss half of our impact, which is that China invades regional partners. At that point, that goes clean extended. But then go to the term on miscalculation. Understand that Satchel explains that miscalculation is all based on intent, because miscalculation starts off as a small escalation, but it has to be brought up to a larger conflict. At that point, because China literally has no intent to go to war right now, miscalc is not going to happen, war is not going to happen, and UNCLOS is inevitably going to collapse. But even then, war doesn't occur until you anger hardliners.
Alright, we'll take prep time beginning.
miscalculation is derived from intent for conflict, right?
No.
Like, what's your front line to my?
I'm telling you that miscalculation starts off as a small scale. Like in your own words, two ships colliding.
Sure.
Countries then view that they need intent
So
to build it up
just
to
do-
war.
okay,
I.e.,
sure.
why during the Soviet War and the
Wait,
Cold
so-
War we had hundreds
Okay,
of examples of
regardless,
miscal.
here,
There wasn't the
let me
impact
ask
you
my
talked
follow-up
about.
question.
Go ahead.
Regardless of whether or not the initial small incident happens, you say in order for it to escalate to a full-scale
We need
conflict,
intent, yeah.
there needs to be intent.
Yeah. So my question
again,
is, does
why
China
would-
have intent?
Why would China have intent when they are guaranteed to lose a conflict with the United States, or
Because
at
that's
the
not our
very
impact.
worst, you're
I mean,
like,
okay,
okay,
no,
wait,
you
wait,
read
wait,
two
very
cards.
simple, very
Like,
simple
bro, I
question.
can reread it for you.
If China
You missed a part of
here,
it.
no, I understand. If
Yeah.
China invades Vietnam, what is America's decision calculus in responding to that?
I mean, in your words, probably just ignoring it, right?
No,
Because
that
we don't
makes
have
little
much of an
sense,
interest
right?
in the region.
Like we
You
have
read
little,
that.
we have little interest right now because China's not doing things like invading Vietnam.
But you,
If
wait,
China
but you told me
invades
in
Vietnam-
response
Here,
to our
here, here.
case that China's expanding.
Wait,
so
wait.
is China expanding
You-
or are they
wait,
not?
wait.
And does the
You-
U.S. care or do they
here,
not?
You read it.
You
very-
literally just read
very
multiple
simple.
things
Here.
that contradict
Your own
themselves.
impact evidence says that America, any conflict in the region would bring America in because of mutual defense treaties.
Yeah.
So China knows this as well. Why would they want to bring America into a conflict if they know it's guaranteed destruction?
Okay, let's buy the argument. If that's true, would that mean that no war is inherently going to happen at all?
Like no nuclear conflict is going to happen, yes.
No nuclear conflict. Okay, but China still can invade smaller nations.
Right, but they know that that would lead to a nuclear conflict. So
Not
they would
really.
do so.
I mean, like,
Your
we're
own
high
evidence.
schoolers, and you literally
Your
just read the
own
U.S.
evidence.
doesn't care.
Here.
What are the odds
No,
that,
no,
like, the
your
Chinese
own- here.
intelligence agencies
Here.
don't know the U.S. doesn't care either?
Dude, your own evidence
That literally
says
doesn't make
that
sense.
any sort of conflict in the region would bring America in and flare
I mean,
up
not
a
really.
nuclear war that
Here's
kills
why.
12 million.
Not
like
really,
that's
right?
the last three cards of your case.
Yeah, and we can tell you that even if that doesn't happen, the first three cards
No,
of the
because
impact still happen.
The second
China
part
can
of your
still
impact
invade.
short circuits the first part because
Not
China
really.
knows like
Right?
do you think
no,
wait, so
the
you as
reason
a-
for that
you
to
as a
Ryan,
high
Ryan, I'm
schooler,
trying to you
like,
just keep like asking questions and then answering them for yourselves. Like let's have a discussion here.
Sure,
No,
like-
you need to buy the fact that the United States is going to inherently care about the area. What we
Wait,
tell you is
this is
no, that doesn't
wait,
matter.
wait, I'm confused. Like again, insofar where your analysis says that America like views a conflict in the region as unacceptable, so they would enter
No, that's
because
not
of
what we
mutual
said.
defense treaties.
The United, like, I don't care about what the U.S. views. Yeah, we may have read that in case, but like, literally by your response, the U.S. doesn't care about the
Like,
area.
no, but like they're not contradictory responses, right? Like,
Except
like
they are,
before
right?
a war, no, before a war,
Yes.
America doesn't have interest in the
Then
region.
what
so
was
they
the
don't
point of the
care.
response?
Because no, I'm saying that
Right?
like specifically,
Ryan, you
America's
know there's
not
a
gonna
reason you
provoke a
read
war.
that response.
Because it takes up the first part of your case. It doesn't interact
What?
at all with this analysis that like America's going to enter a conflict, right?
Yes. No, here's why that matters. Because you tell me China's expanding right now. If
Yeah.
China's really expanding and pushing down other countries, and the U.S. cared when China expands, the U.S. would be there right now. And if the U.S. was already there, we would like, like everything you say just contradicts itself.
It's gonna be. It's gonna be like the framing, I guess, just their case or case. Start on their case. Remember the framing overview that Ryan gives you. They're not going to go to the war, so it's important to stop Chinese expansion and so they can stop undermining other countries' sovereignty. But then on the first one about angry hardliners, remember the term that Ryan means about how Noy says that if you affirm you decrease military power is what provokes hardliners and justifies their position. But then at the bottom, remember that decreasing military power is especially important because Glazer says that's the #1 reason into miscalculation, which is especially problematic. But then go to our case. First at the top, Beach says that the Navy already follows the UNCLOS, so they won't break the provisions. But then they say that 167 members are challenging. But remember, Kwok tells you that our allies are backing down against China and they're not effectively countering China. And the only way that they can is with American support. But then they say that like it doesn't matter if they like if UNCLOS collapses because they can go to other maritime law. But what's important is that other maritime law don't have dispute settlements under them, and that's why UNCLOS is important, because that's how it resolves tensions, is through these dispute settlement mechanisms. But then go to our third point. They say that like our card is talking about China stirring up trouble, but like that's our evidence says that's what China says, but remember, empirically, China actually did listen, because in the first year after the ruling, our allies did successfully counter China, but they backed down when they perceived that they didn't have American support anymore. But then they say like countries perceive themselves to be losers. That doesn't make any sense. If anything, it's just justifying Chinese expansion. But then they say that like ASEAN countries, they listen to ASEAN countries with the code of conduct. But remember, with multilateral efforts, remember Engel tells you that ASEAN countries refuse to condemn China without America, which means that they actually cannot counter China without America, and this multilateral isn't working. But then you can group the three responses he says about it doesn't stop them from corrosing, it doesn't stop them from breaking. Remember, Kwok tells you that by America acceding at least to a multilateral signal for our allies to enforce, and that increases the opportunity cost for China, which means that they will listen. And a year and a half ago is not a long time ago, it's pretty recent, and that other maritime law doesn't have dispute settlements, and Nemitz says this is twice as likely. At the end of the day, Kwok says that it provides coordinated pressure for multilateralism, and O'Rourke says that it is tested present to challenge other parts of UNCLOS, which is why Smith says it's on the verge of collapse, and Nemitz says that dispute settlement is twice as likely under
Nice.
UNCLOS.
Can we get your card that no other international law has dispute mechanisms?
I mean, like, I feel like it's your burden to show me they would use one that they do.
I mean, it was your response.
I mean, like, sure, but I don't have a card for that.
Okay, it was analytical.
Yeah.
Dope. Okay, we're gonna be using some prep time.
Wait, just.
It's okay. Okay. That was actually more than 48 seconds.
Okay. Brief off-time roadmap, we're gonna be doing our case, their case. Is everyone ready? Start off on their overview where they say that the United States will never get into a war with China. By their analysis that the United States doesn't care about the region, at that point the impact scenario is that China will invade their regional actors. Also, understand that while Asia negotiations are not working, there's still diplomacy, which shows that China has an intent to deal with things diplomatically. We say that changes in the app world. Go to our first contention. We say between the United States and China, there's a new sense of normalcy where neither of them want to confront each other. We say right now there's no intent to go to war, but that changes. They read you a term which says that we decrease military power through FONOPs, but look to Manning 18, which says that China understands the United States want FONOPs to secure their trade routes. They're not going to get mad because of that. But second, they say uniqueness controls the internal link, and that China's expanding, and hardliners will get mad right now. But understand they're expanding diplomatically. At that point, it's better than war. With that, we get access to hardliners when we tell you that once the United States affirms, that presence on the arbitration panel upsets them and legitimizes their beliefs. go to their response on our second warrant where they say that China's views were confirmed when we lost the 2016 tribunal. To understand that wasn't the U.S. doing it, that was the Philippines. At that point, extend our impact on regional conflict, where we say that once China pursues hegemony militaristically, they're going to invade regional allies and lead to millions of deaths. Go on to their case on their contention 1. We tell you that there's 166 members in UNCLOS that could have done this. They say that allies are backing down, but we say it's still diplomacy, which means it's a lot better than war, and it'll still deal with those things. Extend the response that Al tells you on their first warrant, that while we make it a seat at the table, that's exactly what angers hardliners and pushes them to pursue things militaristically. Also, extend the response that Al tells you that China will just reject the amendments that we propose once we get that seat. Go to their second warrant on solving hypocrisy. Extend the response that Al tells you that there will always be another sense for them to look at America hypocritically. It could be that. It could be anything else. But go on to their third warrant. Extend the response that goodwill will not stop their coalition to expand. They're not going to stop econ dependence, which allied countries will always have on China, which means negate.
Yeah, you can take the first
Yeah.
one.
So in the past, when we increased like our amount of like forces and presence in the region, have we gone to war?
No,
I would say no, because
Does
the
it-
United States isn't actually challenging our hegemony or trying to take it away from them. We say
Wait,
that
like
changes
our
the gap.
naval operations in the region don't challenge
No,
China's
okay, so
hegemony?
here's the explanation. So freedom of navigation operations were originally started by the United States
No,
to
not
just
just
secure their
FONOPS,
trade routes.
like not just FONOPS, like
Okay, well,
military
other examples of
presence
hard
in
power,
general, right? So like for
What
example,
in
doing
general?
things like
Like,
our
what specific-
ISR
like what in
operations,
general?
like our ISR operations in China to like
That's
use surveillance
FONOPS.
against them. No, ISR is not FONOPS.
Okay,
ISR
what
is
is ISR?
surveillance. FONOPS are like the opposites of surveillance, considering you're taking the
Okay,
biggest summary
well,
you
like,
have.
here's the thing. The only operation that you guys ever specify was FONOPS.
No, like we give
No,
you
no,
in
that's, you're
general.
right. That's literally all you said. That's all
No, you
your
drop the
partner said
turn on
summary.
the impact level that says specifically that our military like activities in the region in general are the number one cause for miscalculation.
And yeah,
Okay,
and
but
we
at that
responded to miscalc, and your partner didn't respond to it. So
No,
that
no,
point
Also,
is
at the
Your
point at which
impact
these
scenario is
military
still,
operations like the ISR are not trying to take China away from the South China Sea, hardliners aren't going to get mad.
You know what, let's
They
just
can't
ask-
chase them away
let's
from the
just
South China
ask
Sea. They're
a
in the
general
South China
question.
Sea.
If China gets even more mad, are they more or less likely to follow UNCLOS?
Wait, I'm confused. Like China's
It's a
already
simple question.
expanding at its maximum
Yeah.
pace.
Here,
How
I'll
do they get
restate it
more
so
mad?
people aren't confused.
Like, what does more mad mean?
They want to take a military approach.
So
We don't
the-
see
are
conflict
they
right now,
like
do we?
like the reason that like they're not taking military approach right now is they understand they can just
political moderates
exploit
are
the
in
other
power, right?
countries under like exploitative like contracts and do the
Yes.
exact same thing without using
What's
the
the
military.
impact of exploitative contracts?
Like I would say
Like,
the
how can the judge
sovereignty of
vote on
every
that
other
without-
country in the region. Like if you're stopping China from expanding at all, that short circuits any sort of hard power expansion as well.
How
Okay,
does
can
China
we take a
how does
question?
China respond to someone trying to stop them? Do you say they would respond positively or negatively?
I mean, positively, empirically,
Wait,
Guam
hold on.
says
So
that's
if
wrong.
they're trying to
Why
stop
not?
China, they're just gonna be like, cool, that's
Yeah,
great.
because China understands, like they're not a stupid country. They
Wait,
know
if
that.
that's
Wait, so
true,
how does
no,
war
wait.
happen?
If that's true, then why do they get mad at our why do they get mad at our naval operations if you tell us that's us trying to stop them?
No, because our naval operations
Bro.
don't stop them; they provoke them. The
Okay.
difference is
Literally,
hard,
you
like
can't
soft
just pick
pressure.
and choose what provokes them. You know what I mean?
No, you
If
can't.
the intent
Here,
of those
here,
operations
if I'm
is to
going,
stop
if I'm
them,
going to the
why
table,
doesn't
and I'm saying,
I'm
hey,
gonna clarify
allies.
all of this. Can I take a question?
Yeah, sure.
If I'm a hardliner, I'm saying the United States is trying to take the South China Sea away from us, and they're not doing that. Are they gonna believe me when I say that?
Wait,
But
what?
you say that US isn't
Bro, it's a
trying to
simple-
keep
you-
it away.
yeah,
It's
just
a simple
answer the
question.
question.
If
It's like-
I'm saying
Wait,
the
I'm not
United
gonna
States
do
is
that.
trying to take the South China Sea away and they're doing no actions to do that, will they believe
That
me?
America is doing no actions to do that. America is doing actions right now. We're using our hard power
Yeah,
in the region.
okay,
Okay,
that's
it's
great,
fine.
but you
Gone
guys also
over this.
say
This
that
hard
China doesn't
power
get mad at
does
stuff
not
like that.
take the South China Sea away from China. It's just things like freedom of navigation operations and the ISR, which used to be for surveillance, still doesn't
Even
take it
so,
away
you
from
literally
China.
conceded in cross. China doesn't get mad at our military. At that point, the only risk is
Wait,
like
I
being on
did
panels.
not concede. Is everyone ready?
Yeah.
I'm gonna go hardliners. The impact on their turn, or the turn on their impact on that case.
Hardliners turn their back.
Times
starts now.
On hardliners, two pieces of analysis that literally damn this argument. The first is they miss the nuance. We say that phone ops directly justify hardliner expansion. They just say that China understands that phone ops are something we do. That doesn't interact with the analysis from Cronin, who says very explicitly that for freedom of navigation operations only provoke and increase the power of hardliners in the region. But secondly, they drop the D-link on this argument, which is that moderates already listen to hardliners to win votes, which means that uniqueness controls the direction of the link. Hardliners are already expanding Chinese hegemony in the region through things like lawfare, which means they have no link. That is damning for their argument. They cannot win. They literally drop terminal defense. On the impact, they dropped a clean term that controls the internal link to conflict. Noiso7 says you decrease reliance on military operations in general. And Glacio says that it's the number one cause of miscalculation in the region. And insofar they say themselves that it needs to go from a miscalc to an intention and then conflict. And without the initial miscalc, that doesn't happen. And insofar where miscalc gets triggered by military operations, the only world a war happens is in their world. We're controlling the internal link there. There's too much dropped analysis on their case for them to win than in our case. At the top, they say China's doing diplomacy, which is still better. The problem is it's a comparative. In their world, it's exploitative diplomacy. In our world, we're completely solving back for China. And let's go to why. Go to our third one about enforcing ruling. Specifically, Kwok says that in the face of multilateral pressure, China steps down immediately because there's a higher opportunity cost. This analysis is dropped. Then saying the first year of the UNCLOS ruling, China did listen, but the problem was our allies thought that America had abandoned them, so they backed down. That's the only empiric as to what actually happens in the recent years. But then more importantly, they say we don't stop economic independence between the two countries. The problem is, again, what Kwok specifically says that our allies are backing down because they they originally valued sovereignty over economy, but they thought that America wasn't backing them. On the impact level, Rourke says that China's interpretation would set a precedent challenge in the entire world. Smith says that leads to the collapse of UNCLOS when they break right now. Nemes says that doubles the number UNCLOS doubles bilateral treaties. On the impact, we short circuit their link because if China's not expanding at all, that means that they're not using hard power, which means we don't go to war. But secondly, more importantly, we have a better strength of link. There's a 100% probability of stopping them because of the empirics. They have no strength of link as to stopping as to how much the propensity of conflict.
Nice. So it's gonna be.
We've got 5 seconds of prep left. We're going to use that. Okay, that's fine.
So it's just gonna be hardliner. It's gonna be their case, ours. Pretty simple. Everyone ready?
Yes.
Nice. Start up at the top of the case to completely drop what Jackson extends in summary, which is that the United States is not inherently powerful enough to switch the entire, if UNCLOS is really going to collapse, it means 166 countries are inherently going to be following UNCLOS. China, Jackson literally tells you that every single one of those countries could push against China's legitimization of their false interpretations, but literally, the United States is not powerful enough to do that. We're a single nation. But either that, the biggest thing they could drop is that Kuwait explains that the reason China does not follow UNCLOS is because they can always point to the United States narrative as the United States is trying to stir up trouble. Jackson tells you that China can always point to things like THAAD or anti-missile systems and to things like the trade war which they're currently doing right now. At that point, even if they solve for hypocrisy, that doesn't matter because China can inherently always point to other things. The reason that matters is because the only offense they extend in final focus is who explains that China responds to a coordinated response, but that's literally not what their evidence says. Call for the evidence is that China does not listen because the United States is stirring up trouble. At that point, because they drop the fact that China's always going to get mad at the United States, UNCLOS is inevitably going to collapse. But they go to the impact. They completely drop what I told you in rebuttal, which is that inherently it doesn't make sense. If territorial disputes are the number one cause of war for the past 30 years, then UNCLOS inherently is not working. Their own impact evidence contradicts itself. At that point, go to hardliners. First, they tell you that FONOPs justify expansionism, but literally Manning 17 explains that that's inherently false because the Chinese government understands that it's only being used to protect trade routes. That's why we haven't seen retaliation. But then second, they tell you that moderates are listening to hardliners to get votes. That's literally not our arguments. Votes are not the same thing as actual policy. At that point, Sun 16 explains that the second you join UNCLOS, you justify hardliner beliefs, and then Zhang 16 explains that that justification allows them to be out political moderates. At that point, it's not just a system of votes, that's a system of policy. That's why Farley explains that the second China gets questioned and they start to get pushed back, since Xi's walked in a corner, he's going to declare war. At that point, Saud explains that historically, China's invaded smaller neighbors like they did with Vietnam in the 50s, where they sent 80,000 troops and killed 50,000 people. And then they talk about miscalc. A, the response is brand new and final focus. I had the response in rebuttal. But then second, understand that miscalc always starts up small. That's why hundreds of examples of miscalculation in the Soviet war never led to conflict. The internal war of everything here is intent. But because China doesn't have intent, collapse is inevitable. And the only thing left in today's round is hardliners turning from votes to policy. You are going to vote on the negation. Round up.